Right now, without any instruction from you, your diaphragm is already doing something. It has been doing this since the moment you were born. Every breath, a slow muscular contraction and release. 14 times a minute at rest. Automatic. Below your awareness. But the machinery controlling that rhythm is not in your chest. It lives in a cluster of roughly 200 neurons buried in the lower part of your brainstem, a region researchers call the pre-Botzinger complex. This structure does not need your conscious brain to function. Research published in Nature identified the specific circuit here that generates your sigh reflex, a circuit that has been operating in mammals for hundreds of millions of years. Imagine you are standing on the eastern African savannah, approximately 1.8 million years ago. You are Homo erectus. Your brain is considerably larger than your predecessors. Your legs are proportionally longer. Your body is adapted for covering ground at pace across open terrain. Research on the skeletal adaptations of Homo erectus has concluded that endurance running, the capacity to run long distances using aerobic metabolism, was a key survival ability of this species, rare among mammals and exclusive to the human genus among primates. You are not yet running. You are at the threshold. Something in the grass moved, something that should not have moved. And in under 1 second, before your conscious brain has processed what you just saw, your breathing changes. What happens next is not something you decided, it is something your brainstem decided for you. The same brainstem your Homo erectus ancestor had, running the same sequence it has run for 2 million years. Your diaphragm is already executing that sequence right now, every time a threat appears. Here is what it is actually doing, and why you cannot stop it. The sequence starts in your amygdala, a small, almond-shaped structure deep in your brain that has been your threat detection system for far longer than you have been human. Research in the field of evolutionary threat processing confirms that certain ancestral threats trigger a specialized, evolutionarily preserved subcortical pathway capable of producing full autonomic reactions before the stimulus reaches conscious awareness. Your amygdala does not call a meeting with your prefrontal cortex. It sends a signal directly to the brainstem, which sends a signal along the phrenic nerve. 2 long branches running from your neck down through your chest cavity, and your diaphragm responds. This is a subcortical loop. Your thinking brain is not invited. The first thing your diaphragm does when a real threat is detected is almost nothing. A brief pause, a moment of reduced breathing or complete breath hold. Research on the amygdala's role in respiratory control shows that when the central nucleus of the amygdala activates in response to imminent threat, it can reflexively pause respiration. An evolutionarily determined behavior consistent with the broader freeze response your amygdala coordinates. The evolutionary rationale is direct. If a predator is close, silence is survival. An animal that holds its breath cannot be heard breathing. Your Homo erectus ancestor knew this instinctively, not as knowledge, but as reflex. Crouch. Stop. Stop breathing. Not a decision, a program. This is the first phase, freeze and silence. But it cannot last, because a body that does not breathe will make its own decision to override the pause. And what happens next is where your diaphragm earns its place as the most ancient survival tool you carry. When the pause breaks, your diaphragm does not return to its resting rhythm. It goes to what researchers now call the physiological sigh pattern. Research identified in the 1930s and recently mapped to specific brainstem circuits in a study published in Nature describes this as a double inhalation followed by a long exhalation. The first breath in is full. Then, without exhaling, a second shorter burst of inhalation tops off the lungs. Then a long, controlled release. Why double? Because during the apnea, the pause, your alveoli, the tiny air sacs deep in your lungs, begin to partially deflate. A single breath cannot fully reinflate them. The second inhalation pushes air into the corners. Research published in Cell Reports Medicine by Balban and colleagues at Stanford University confirms that this double inhale pattern reinflates collapsed alveoli that a standard breath cannot reach, maximizing the lung surface area available for gas exchange in the crucial seconds that follow. But the double inhale is only half of the mechanism. The long exhalation that follows it is where the real prehistoric survival engineering lives. Your diaphragm is mechanically attached to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the primary communication line between your brain and your internal organs, running from your brainstem all the way to your gut. When your diaphragm descends on a full inhalation, it generates negative pressure inside your chest. When it rises on the exhalation, especially a long one, it physically stimulates the vagus nerve. Research confirms that this mechanical stimulation of the vagus nerve during exhalation increases parasympathetic activity, decreasing heart rate and signaling to the rest of your nervous system that the acute phase of the threat response can begin to resolve. Your prehistoric ancestors' diaphragm was executing the same hydraulic maneuver during every predator encounter. Not because they studied physiology, because their brainstem had been refined by millions of years of selection to run this exact sequence as the fastest available route from peak alarm to controlled readiness. Think about what that means in practical terms. Your body does not want you paralyzed by fear when a predator is in the grass. It wants you at peak readiness, oxygenated, heart rate modulated, muscles primed. The physiological sigh pattern is the transition protocol between panic and function. Your diaphragm is the switch. There is a second chemistry happening during that long exhalation that goes beyond the vagus nerve. Carbon dioxide, CO2, is one of the primary physiological signals that drives your anxiety response. When CO2 builds up in your blood, your brainstem interprets it as a suffocation threat and amplifies the alarm. During the breath hold phase of a threat response, CO2 rises. Research on amygdala-driven apnea published in PMC confirms that CO2 buildup during the freeze phase can itself generate a secondary wave of panic and hyperventilation when the breath hold releases. The long exhalation of the physiological sigh clears that CO2 load. It ends the secondary alarm before it escalates. Your diaphragm is not just a breathing muscle. It is the biological valve that interrupts this feedback loop. The Stanford University study by Balban and colleagues, published in Cell Reports Medicine in 2023, tested this exact pattern. Double inhale, long exhale, repeated for 5 minutes, against box breathing, hyperventilation, and mindfulness meditation in 111 participants over 28 days. Cyclic sighing produced the greatest reduction in respiratory rate and the largest improvement in positive mood. The research suggests that the exhalation emphasis pattern is the most effective voluntary breathing technique for reducing physiological arousal. Not because it was invented, because it was rediscovered. Your body has been running it for 2 million years. We are halfway through, and we have only covered the mechanism. What the prehistoric context adds to this is something the clinical data alone cannot tell you, because it reveals exactly when this program activates and why your diaphragm runs it in 3 distinct stages, not 1. If you find the science in this channel useful, stay close. The next video covers a biological system that operates in the same brainstem neighborhood as everything we have discussed today, and it runs every single night whether you choose to engage with it or not. The research on it is just as old and just as ignored. Your group has been moving since mid-afternoon, 6 miles already. The light is dropping, and then, within 20 meters, movement. Not grass this time. Breathing. Something large. Your diaphragm responds before your name for the feeling forms, because you do not need a name for it. Your brainstem had the response catalogued 2 million years before language. Phase 1. The hold. Your amygdala fires. Your brainstem locks the phrenic nerve. Your diaphragm pauses mid-cycle. No sound from your lungs, no movement. Your group does the same because the signal travels chemically as well. Cortisol and adrenaline exhaled through your skin, picked up by the people nearest to you. This is silence as a survival tool. Seconds pass. CO2 rises in your blood. Your brainstem registers the chemistry, and the program shifts to Phase 2. Phase 2. The double inhale. Your diaphragm descends on the first breath, pulling the maximum available air volume into your chest. Before you exhale, the brainstem sends a secondary signal, and your diaphragm descends again, fractionally further, pressing the last remaining air volume into the lower lobes, reinflating the alveoli that the pause had allowed to partially collapse. Your lung surface area is now at full capacity. Oxygen delivery to your blood is at maximum. Phase 3. The long exhale. Your diaphragm rises slowly, not a sharp expulsion, a controlled ascent that stretches the exhalation well beyond your normal breath. As it rises, the mechanical pressure on your vagus nerve increases. Parasympathetic tone rises. Heart rate drops fractionally from its peak. Cortisol release slows. Not calm, readiness. The distinction is critical. Your body is not trying to relax you. It is trying to move you from paralysis to precision. This is the difference between panic breathing and the prehistoric program. Panic breathing, short, rapid, chest only, skips phase 1 and collapses phase 3 entirely. It delivers CO2 without clearing it and leaves your nervous system spiraling rather than resetting. The prehistoric pattern is the antidote, and the data confirms it. The body you are sitting in right now does not know whether your nervous system is responding to a predator or a deadline. The amygdala does not grade threats by category, it grades them by intensity. Research on physiological stress reactions published in StatPearl's NCBI confirms that acute stress triggers the same respiratory changes, airway constriction, shallow and rapid breathing, regardless of whether the source of the stress is physical or psychological. Your diaphragm receives the same signal either way. What your body is doing in a stress response, the shallow upper chest breathing pattern that feels like urgency, is the first phase of the prehistoric sequence running incompletely. The brainstem fires phase 1, but the environment provides no physical resolution, so phase 2 and 3 never arrive. The CO2 does not clear, the vagus nerve does not receive the mechanical signal, the alarm stays on. This is not a modern problem, it is an ancient mechanism running in a context it was not designed for. Your diaphragm cannot distinguish a predator from a performance review, but you can. And that is the only opening the prehistoric program gives you. Here is what the research actually tells you to do, and what your diaphragm already knows. The physiological sigh pattern requires spinal posture that allows full diaphragm descent. In a slumped forward position, your abdominal organs compress the diaphragm dome and prevent full descent. This is one structural reason why the same stress response feels worse in a chair than standing. Your ancestor was rarely still enough to slump. When you consciously run the prehistoric pattern, and the research confirms you can access it voluntarily, the sequence begins with a full inhalation through the nose, not the chest. The lower ribs should move first, laterally. Your abdomen should expand slightly. This engages the full surface area of the diaphragm dome, not just the anterior portion. Without exhaling, you take a second, shorter inhale. This is the top-up. Your diaphragm is already at near maximum descent. The second breath pushes past that point, reinflating the lower alveoli. Research published in Nature identified the specific brainstem neurons in the retrotrapezoid nucleus that generate exactly this sigh pattern in mammals, triggered by stress, hypoxia, and accumulated respiratory need. The exhalation is where the parasympathetic signal is generated. Research from the Stanford study confirms the extended exhale, roughly twice the duration of the combined inhalation, produces the greatest reduction in arousal, not the inhalation itself. Your brainstem runs this pattern spontaneously every few minutes during sleep, approximately once every 5 minutes, to reinflate alveoli and maintain lung compliance. You are doing it right now, tonight, without knowing. The Stanford study involving 111 participants found that cyclic sighing, this double inhale long exhale pattern performed for 5 minutes per day over 28 days, produced greater improvement in mood and a greater reduction in respiratory rate than mindfulness meditation performed for the same duration. The research suggests the mechanism is bottom-up. You change the physiology first and the emotional state follows. This is not the modern approach. This is the prehistoric approach. Body leads, mind follows. This is worth sitting with for a moment. Your brainstem does not wait for your permission. It runs this program whenever the chemistry demands it. But the research now confirms that you can run it on purpose. And when you do, you are not using a therapy technique. You are re-engaging the most ancient stress resolution tool your species ever developed. Research from the University of Bonn, published in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, concluded that the mammalian diaphragm evolved approximately 300 million years ago, 50 million years earlier than previously assumed, as a respiratory mechanism that intertwined with the evolution of endurance capacity and thermoregulation. By the time Homo erectus was persistence hunting across the African savannah approximately 1.8 million years ago, this structure had been refined across 300 million years of survival pressure. It is not a simple breathing muscle. It is the most evolutionarily tested physiological tool in your body. The content in this video is educational and is based on published scientific research. It is not medical advice. If you are experiencing respiratory symptoms, anxiety disorders, or any health concerns, consult a qualified medical professional. Your diaphragm runs 3 phases when a threat is detected: the hold, the double inhale, the long release. You did not invent this sequence, you inherited it. From a body that spent 2 million years being tested on whether it got the sequence right. When you notice the pattern has started without your permission, the shallow breathing, the tension in the chest, you can interrupt it with the same sequence your brainstem was going to run anyway. Upright spine. First inhale through the nose, lower ribs moving out. Second top-up inhale, then exhale twice as slowly as you inhaled. Research published in Cell Reports Medicine confirms this is the single most effective voluntary breath intervention the clinical literature has identified for reducing acute physiological arousal. You have been breathing in and out approximately 20,000 times today. Most of those breaths, your diaphragm handled without a single instruction from you. That is not something to take for granted. Every one of those contractions runs a program written over 300 million years, refined over 2 million years of human survival, and still executing, without error, without rest, in the body you are currently sitting in. The next video in this series covers something that operates in the same brainstem neighborhood as your respiratory control center, but it runs exclusively during sleep in a 90-minute cycle, and it does something to your survival threat memories that nothing else in your biology can replicate. Your Homo erectus ancestor depended on it every night. Research suggests most modern humans are disrupting it without knowing. That program is already running in you tonight, whether you understand it or not. If you want to understand what else your body is running from that same brainstem, programs that evolved under the same pressure, in the same species, for the same survival imperative, stay close. The architecture down there is older than any habit you have ever tried to build. It responds to one thing: evidence of what kept the body alive.